Most people think the Great Flood began with human wickedness. Genesis gives that reason. But one ancient text tells a much bigger story. It's a text quoted in the New Testament letter of Jude, a prophecy attributed to Enoch himself. And it claims the corruption didn't begin on earth at all. It began in heaven. A group of angels, entrusted with watching over humanity, crossed a line they could never uncross. And what they dragged down with them corrupted everything. Forbidden knowledge, giant offspring, a world drowning in blood. Genesis 6 records it in only a handful of verses. The Book of Enoch expands those few verses into a much larger story. And what it reveals is more disturbing than any legend. Follow it from the oath on the mountain to the prison beneath the earth, and the flood will never look the same again. Who was Enoch? Before we can understand the Watchers, we have to understand the man this ancient book is attributed to. Enoch appears for only a moment in Genesis, the great-grandfather of Noah, a man who, in Genesis 5:24, walked with God and was no more because God took him. A single verse, but an ancient work known as First Enoch turns that one line into the central witness of one of the most influential supernatural narratives in ancient Jewish literature. Most traditions don't count First Enoch as scripture, though it remains canonical in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church to this day. Yet its shadow is everywhere. It expands on who the sons of God of Genesis 6 really were, why giants walked the earth before the flood, and how heaven itself was pulled into humanity's ruin. Whether you read it as sacred history or ancient memory, it became one of the most influential texts the world nearly forgot. God's Watchers and their mission. In the beginning, the Watchers were not evil. They were heavenly beings assigned to observe the growing human race, to watch, to guide from a distance, to witness without interfering. The text calls them the sons of heaven. Their place in heaven was secure. Leading them was an angel named Semjaza. At first, nothing hinted at rebellion, but as generation after generation of humans spread across the earth, something in them began to shift. They weren't simply watching anymore. Curiosity became desire, and desire would push them toward a decision no angel had ever dared to make. The Forbidden Oath on Mount Hermon. The daughters of men grew renowned for their beauty. The text describes the Watchers looking on them with a hunger that duty could no longer hold back. Semjaza understood exactly what crossing that line would cost. He warned the others that this would bring God's judgment, and confessed he was afraid he alone would carry the blame if their courage failed. So they made sure it couldn't fail. 200 Watchers swore a binding oath together so that none could turn back once the consequences came. They descended on the summit of Mount Hermon, a place that, the text says, took its name from that very oath. They chose human wives. They shattered the boundary God had set between heaven and earth. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was the first organized angelic rebellion carried out by choice. Forbidden knowledge changes everything. Marrying human women was not their only crime. The Book of the Watchers says they also handed humanity knowledge it was never meant to hold so soon. Azazel became the most infamous of them all. He taught men to forge swords, blades, shields, and armor, the first weapons the world had ever known. He taught women cosmetics, jewelry, the art of altering the face God had given them. Others revealed sorcery, enchantments, the secret power of roots and plants. Others still unveiled the movement of the stars and hidden sciences that had once been God's alone. And at first, it must have felt like a gift. But this was power without wisdom, fire placed in the hands of children. Weapons bred violence, vanity buried humility. Every secret the Watchers whispered pulled mankind one step further from the path it was made for. The world didn't fall in a day. It fell one lesson at a time. The birth of the Nephilim. The Watchers had crossed heaven's greatest boundary, and what came next was worse than anything the knowledge alone had done. The consequences arrived in the cradle. Human women began giving birth to children unlike anything the world had seen. Genesis 6:4 names them the Nephilim, and many scholars connect that name to a Hebrew root meaning to fall, though its exact meaning remains debated. Genesis calls them mighty men of renown, but the Book of Enoch strips away the poetry and shows you what that meant. Giants, towering and insatiable, born from a union that was never supposed to exist. At first, they only consumed. Crops disappeared, herds vanished, whole harvests gone in a season, until ordinary families had nothing left. And when the fields ran empty, the giants turned on the people themselves. Imagine living in that world. Imagine knowing the thing walking toward your village cannot be reasoned with, cannot be satisfied, cannot be fed enough to make it stop. That was daily life before the flood, the ground trembling under footsteps that meant your death. In this account, the earth itself cried out beneath the weight of the bloodshed. One choice in heaven had swallowed all of creation. Heaven responds. For a time, it seemed nothing could stop it. Then, at last, heaven answered. The four great archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, looked down on a world collapsing beneath the Watchers' rebellion. Everywhere, violence, suffering, corruption. Humanity's screams rose toward heaven, and the archangels carried those cries before God. Their appeal named two figures at the center of the catastrophe. Azazel, for corrupting mankind with forbidden knowledge and the arts of war. Semjaza, for leading 200 Watchers into open rebellion. Together, they had torn the boundary between heaven and earth. This was no longer humanity's crisis alone. It had become heaven's. And with every innocent life lost, the moment for mercy slipped further away, until it was gone. God's judgment begins. And this is where everything changed. God's response was swift, and each archangel was given a different mission. Uriel was sent to Noah, warning him that a flood was coming to cleanse the earth and telling him how to survive it. Raphael was sent for Azazel. He bound the fallen Watcher hand and foot, cast him into a place of darkness, and buried him under rough stones to wait for the day of judgment. The corruption had begun with forbidden knowledge, and now its greatest teacher was silenced. Gabriel was ordered to destroy the giants, but not by his own hand. He turned them against one another until they tore each other apart in endless war. Then Michael confronted Semjaza and the rest. He declared their sentence. They would watch their own children die before their eyes, then be chained beneath the earth for 70 generations. And, according to the text, they remain there still, waiting for a final judgment that has not yet come.
Enoch, messenger of God. When the watchers finally understood there was no escape, they turned to the one being they thought might still reach heaven. A mortal. Enoch, the scribe of righteousness, chosen by God to carry his word. Think about that. The fallen angels who had once stood above humanity now begged a man to plead for them. They asked Enoch to beg God for mercy, hoping their punishment could be undone. Enoch prayed as they asked, but the answer was nothing like they hoped. Instead of forgiveness, God showed him visions of judgment, imprisonment, and the fate awaiting the rebels. When Enoch returned, he brought no comfort. The watchers would never enter heaven again. Their request was denied. Peace would never belong to them. Their rebellion was permanent, and so were its consequences. The prison of the watchers. Enoch's journey didn't end there. He was carried through the heavens and into the hidden places beneath creation. And there he reached something unlike anything he had ever seen. A desolate abyss of blazing fire, endless darkness, and a silence that pressed against the soul. Imagine standing at its edge. No horizon, no sound but fire. A place built not merely to punish, but to hold these beings apart from God until the last day. This, he was told, was the prison prepared for the fallen, where they would remain until judgment fell at the end of all things. A later work, 2nd Enoch, describes similar beings called the Grigori, and even introduces a figure named Satanael, whom many later readers associated with Satan. The Book of Revelation, too, speaks of Satan and angels cast down from heaven. The echoes are hard to ignore. The texts never quite say they are the same story, but you can feel them reaching for one another across the centuries.
Legacy of the Watchers. Thousands of years later, the story still refuses to die. Read it as history, as symbol, or as ancient theology. It circles the same eternal themes: free will, temptation, forbidden knowledge, pride, corruption, and the judgment that always, eventually comes. But look closer, and the pattern doesn't feel ancient at all. Power arriving before wisdom, knowledge racing ahead of restraint, a generation reaching for secrets it isn't ready to hold, and calling it progress. The Watcher's world didn't collapse in a day. It fell one lesson at a time. Ask yourself whether ours is falling any differently. So the question returns, and it's no longer only about them. Were the Watchers simply fallen angels who broke God's law? Or is their story a warning aimed at us? At what happens when desire replaces obedience, and mankind decides it no longer needs the boundary God set? However you answer, it's easy to see why this story has survived for more than 2,000 years. Some warnings don't fade. They wait.